As newsman Bruce Morton once said, this is the sort of social conventions that keeps Americans from punching each other out. So let's keep this civil and fair. All the candidates here tonight are challengers. There is no incumbent in this race. We would like to thank them for taking this opportunity to engage the voters of the 8th District. The community is ready to listen to your answers. Okay, here goes. The first opening statement will be by the candidate from the Republican Party, Micah Edmond. And would you please come up and use the mic here so it records well. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a lovely lady that stopped me when I came in the door with a card if I wanted to ask a question, and I said, I don't think I will be. That's you, right, Brenda? I'd like to thank you all for coming here this evening. This is a great place to be. Actually, I used to own a house here in Kingstowne, so I am very familiar with the area. I want to share a few things with you, essentially my background, my credentials, my experience working on the issues that I define as my priorities, how I've done these things at the federal level already, and then let you know why I got into this race. Briefly, I started my career here in Virginia 16 years ago. I was in New York, and I wanted to get into public service, so I came down here to Virginia to get a commission as a Marine Corps officer down in Quantico. And that started my 8-year career in the Marine Corps. I spent about half of that time, 4 years overseas deployed, and I came back here to serve my final tour at the Pentagon. I spent a year working for the top general writing the defense budget, so very well versed in how we make that budget and what our priorities are. I spent a year dealing with a major issue as Chief of Staff for the general that affected this area, particularly in the country, and that was BRAC 2005. And I spent a year as a speechwriter for the Commandant, doing a lot of coming up to the Hill and having to defend our national security budget, and particularly the dollars that we're spending for veterans. After that, I started my own consulting business, and then I got called back into government. First by the president in 2010. President Obama decided he wanted to focus on issues that are affecting all Americans. And that was our debt and deficit. And we were really concerned that we were looking short term and not thinking long term, not setting priorities and not making investments in the future. I wanted to be a part of that. So even though I was a Republican staffer and had a great bipartisan reputation of having worked with the Armed Services Committee and the Veterans Affairs Committee, I was happy to take the appointment. We spent a year at the Simpson-Bowles Commission working on practical solutions. So not talking about it, not saying what we wanted to do, but actually being the guy in the room that worked on a bipartisan compromise. The biggest disappointment was at the end of the year, President Obama stepped away from the commission, and other members didn't have the political will to stand up to enact the real solutions that it took to solve the problem. So we were left with nothing. A year later, Congress decided to step up and stand up what was called a Joint Select Committee on Deficit Reduction to tackle the problem again. This time they actually enacted a penalty so that Congress wouldn't get off scot-free. That penalty was sequestration. So when sequestration got triggered last summer because members of Congress failed to act, I decided to run. I wanted to stand up and be that voice that would start focusing on a long-term plan that establishes priorities to make the American dream achievable. And that's why I got in this race. That template that I want to stand on is a proven bipartisan compromise. We just need leaders now willing to stand up and fight for it. So I look forward to your questions tonight to defend anything that's in that plan or any ideas that you have about how do we actually attack the solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Please hold your applause until the end. Okay, thank you. Our next speaker is the candidate for the Democratic Party, Don Beyer.
Thank you very much. Good evening, and thank you for inviting me to this forum. Proven, principled, progressive. I've led my family business for 40 years. I was the Lieutenant Governor of Virginia for 8 years, 4 with Democrat Doug Wilder and 4 with Republican George Allen. So I know what it's like to put partisan difference aside, to work together to get things done. And for 4 years, I was the U.S. Ambassador to Liechtenstein and to Switzerland. I've been preparing all my life for the challenges and the responsibilities of serving the U.S. Congress. Let me tell you about my priorities. First, I want to be part of leading and building a new American economy. We need a commitment to full employment, where every American, including our young folks, have good jobs and decent pay. We need immigration reform, a true path to citizenship for the folks who are going to support us as we get older. We need to become the most innovative, information technology economy in the world. We need a deep commitment to our national infrastructure. And I think we need to be ever stronger in lifting families out of poverty with a humane and moral minimum wage. Second, I believe that climate change is the existential crisis of our century. Good leaders think not just about today, but about the years to come. Sea level rise in Virginia and Washington, D.C. and around the world, the slow creep of tropical diseases in the American South, the extinction of animals, all these things will change every one of us. But we're not helpless. There are smart things we can do, beginning with a progressive national carbon tax. This will create jobs, change our decisions, and put money in the pockets of most Americans. We live in a dangerous world. Ebola, ISIS, Russia and the Ukraine, Iranian nuclear bomb, challenges everywhere. But I'm committed to American leadership around the globe because we are the only nation with the values, the history, and the energy to solve these crises as they arise. Last year, 30,000 Americans died of gun violence, and I'm determined to do all I can to keep guns out of the hands of the dangerously mentally ill and of criminals. I will always defend a woman's health and needs and rights. I'm proud of how far America has come in recognizing full marriage equality, and I will work to improve the Affordable Care Act, which is already bringing health care to more than 10 million previously uninsured Americans. Congress is broken, and every relationship of honesty, friendship, and trust that we build brings us one step closer to healing. I reject the vicious partisanship that keeps us from solving our problems, and I want to be someone who works together to make our government work. Growing up, I was taught that we were each put on this earth to build something larger than ourselves, to serve others. That's why I'm running for Congress, and that's why I'll ask for your vote on November 4th. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jeffrey Carson of the Libertarian Party. Mr. Carson.
Thank you, Ann. Good evening, folks. How's everybody doing tonight? All right. Hopefully we give you a good show tonight, all right? Thank you for coming out. I really appreciate you guys coming out, and obviously we all appreciate you having us tonight, so that's why we're doing this, right? Folks, we as a nation, as a people, face a lot of serious problems today. But we can't even begin to address these problems if we continue to pretend that they don't exist. If we continue to allow our politicians to get away with kicking the can down the road for another year, another election cycle, another generation. Is it scary to face these problems head on? You bet. Almost $18 trillion in debt. Deficits averaging close to $1 trillion a year over the past decade. Insolvent and underfunded entitlement programs to the tune of many more tens of trillions of dollars. How about the fact that this year taxpayers will spend close to a quarter of $1 trillion just on net interest payments alone. Think about that, $231 billion this year completely wasted to the likes of China, Japan, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, you name it. All of that's wasted to our creditors. And that's just the fiscal side of the house. Of course, it's easier to pretend that all of this is somebody else's problem, that this mess is somebody else's responsibility to clean up. Of course, it's easier to vote for politicians that tell you that debt and deficits don't matter, that printing money out of thin air is a good idea, that stealing from our kids by running up their tab on our behalf is acceptable simply because our kids aren't here to put up a hand to say stop. Our spending problem is a scary one, as is our meddlesome, haphazard, and dangerous interventionist foreign policy, our failed and unconstitutional drug war, NSA domestic spying programs, militarized police forces, the erosion of our civil liberties. How about the ever-strengthening pull that special interest groups seem to have on our political process? I could go on. The bottom line is this, folks. Do you want someone representing you in Congress that's willing to stand up and take these very difficult issues head on? Do you want someone that's willing to tell you the hard truth, no matter what the political ramifications might be? Do you want someone that's willing to fight the good fight day in and day out for each and every one of you and your kids? Yes? Good. Then you got yourself a candidate. Thank you so much for having me tonight. And I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be the candidate for the Independent Green Party, Jerry Blaze.
Hi, how's everybody doing tonight? Great. Thank you for coming out in the rain and the traffic. It's pretty bad stuff. The first thing I'd like to say is I'm not a professional politician. I'm a regular guy with a job, so rather than dissemble or throw out buzzwords, I'm going to be very direct, and I'll try to answer your questions concisely. I may not even use all my time. So I was a U.S. government intelligence analyst for a few years, and for 8 to 10 hours a day, I read the classified reporting, as a job professionally, and I saw what a failure our foreign policy was abroad. It was so bad that I was inspired to run and to try to change things. So on that note, I'd like to tell you my goals, my highlights, what I'll be fighting for. The first is expanded public transportation. The second thing I'll fight for is universal health care. The third is free higher education. There was a time in this country when we agreed that a high school diploma was necessary and sufficient to make a decent living. Those days are over. It's understood that we all need to go to college, yet that opportunity is only available to the better off. It's unfair and it should be changed. Finally, I'll also fight against the drug war. The drug war is actually a euphemism. There's no such thing as a war on drugs. There's actually a war on poor people and on minorities, where we throw them in cages for victimless crimes. We have the largest prisoner population in the world, both as a percentage and in absolute numbers. That should end. I'm going to fight to eliminate the income tax on the first $100,000 of income. The effect of that would be similar to that of a stimulus, except the wealth would go to the people who need it and who can afford to spend it, rather than to banks. And finally, I'm going to fight to end our wars of aggression and choice abroad. They're disastrous, and there's no positive return on investment from them. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is is an independent candidate, Gwendolyn Beck.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming tonight. I don't know about you guys, but I'm depressed after that. Wow. Okay, so I'm here with the good news. We can solve these problems. I don't think the sea levels are going to rise, hopefully, in our lifetime, but I think that there's a lot that we can do to help them. I think our budget's going to be okay. I think we can fix our tax code, and I think that we don't need to balance the budget on the backs of students or on seniors, especially with the federal workers and the military workers. But we can't do any of this without fixing the gridlock in Congress, because right now, nothing is getting done. There is not one independent in the U.S. House of Representatives, and it doesn't matter how good the resume is for the Republican or for the Democrat, there's still going to be a Republican and a Democrat, and they're not going to be able to fix the gridlock no matter how ambitious their agendas are. And I think that this is the true thing that we need to do if you want to change Congress. Thomas Jefferson said that the United States of America is the greatest chance that mankind has to achieve freedom. And here we are with a Congress that really can't get anything done. And I say, in order to change that, we have to send middle-of-the-road independents. I'm fiscally responsible, socially inclusive, and I think we need a strong national defense. So fiscally responsible, we have plenty of money. We're just not putting it all in the right places. Socially inclusive, I think that we fought hard for our rights, especially women's rights, and I will continue to fight hard for our rights to make choices for our own bodies and for equal pay, and also for marriage equality. And I think we need a strong national defense, because we like peace and security and justice, and we can't have that unless we're safe and secure. I just want to share with you, I got a very nice endorsement yesterday, and I'd like to share with you what they said. First and foremost, did they think the person they were going to endorse would help Congress? Would they be leaders? Did they have a centrist, moderate message? And would they look to change the leadership? And I'm very proud to say that they chose me. I don't want to say anything bad about the other candidates, but they are doing a press release, not me, so I won't go into that. Right, and Politico did a survey yesterday that only 20% of the people in the nation think that the country is on the right track, and 64% said things are out of control in the U.S., which is a pretty strong question for Politico to ask. So I thought I'd share that with you. And my background is as a business person. I am also not a politician. I have a full background in tourism. I rose to manager of national sales for Eastern Airlines, and when they ceased operations, I went into finance. So I worked in U.S. government debt, and I've also written a book on consumer financial protection. And I'm out of time, but please go to my website, gwendolynbeck.com, follow us on Twitter and Facebook, and you'll see our signs around, and we have bands that are pink, and that's because we're dedicated to cancer awareness. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now we go to questions that have come from the audience. The first question is going to be answered by Mr. Byer, and then we're going to move down to Mr. Carson, Mr. Blaze, Ms. Beck, and back to Mr. Edmond. So first question, you get the first 2 minutes, okay? And then we'll move. We're going to ask you to stand because the video camera is focused on here. Stephen Fuller of George Mason University, the economist, says Northern Virginia does not have as high a projected recovery rate as some other areas of the country. The two obvious reasons are unemployment wasn't as bad here as it was in other areas. The second is that we have a lot of DOD consultants that are not going to be refunded. But what would you do to keep our economic recovery up with other parts of the nation?
Thank you. Let me expand a little bit on what Professor Fuller said, too. Last year, the economy in Washington, D.C., which he defines as the city of Washington, Alexandria, and Arlington, fell by 1.9%. It was the largest decrease of any city in America. Second, by the way, was Atlantic City, New Jersey. We really are in a difficult situation. I'd like to brag in this campaign that I've led my family business through 6 recessions, but they've been Northern Virginia recessions. And they've been milder than they have in most of the places in the country. That's not true right now. One of the things that's happened with sequester, remember sequester was Congress's fallback when they couldn't get a budget, has really hurt Northern Virginia hard. So the job one we have to do is get a budget next year, a real budget, and we have to avoid sequester. And everyone I talk to, Democrat and Republican alike, realizes this is necessary for America. I also think we need to think about rebuilding both the defense base in Northern Virginia. As we pulled back on defense, we were pulling troops out of Iraq, pulling troops out of Afghanistan. And all of a sudden, we've realized in the last couple of months that the world is still a very dangerous place. We also need to think about the continued diversification of the Northern Virginia economy. This is a great high-tech place. Back in the early 90s, I co-founded the Northern Virginia Technology Council. And there were times in the 1990s when 75% of all internet traffic in the world went through Northern Virginia. Now we have to rebuild that and make sure that all the information technology agenda is as strong as here. We can be just as strong as Silicon Valley, and we need to be. By the way, all of this, I think, comes around, too, about building the transportation systems here. I'm very proud of all the money that's going to go into Route 1 right now to make it widened and better. And the Jeff Todd Way is across. But one of the responsibilities that whoever's elected Congress will have is to make sure that we bring lots and lots of infrastructure money to continue the progress in Northern Virginia, and especially here in South County.
Mr. Carson?
Yes, ma'am. So, this is actually a question that was asked at the last AARP and League of Women's Voters forum, and I'm going to give you the same answer I gave then, which is I reject the premise of the question. Look, folks, if we keep sending representatives to Congress that have a mentality of us versus them, my district versus your district, right? Team red versus team blue, we're never going to get anything done, okay? We have a massive spending and debt problem right now, and that absolutely has to come first before we start worrying about, our district could get hurt a little bit with this or with that. Folks, we have the federal government. It's the greatest, boondoggle for jobs in the history of mankind. I mean, we have some of the richest counties in the country, not some. We have like 2 of the top 5 richest counties in the country in the DC metro area, okay? When Don says he's been through recessions here, 6 or 7 recessions, that's unfortunate. But, if he lived somewhere else in the country, I'm sure they would have been a lot worse. He even admits this. This cannot be an issue of us versus them. To think that any congressman can go to the House, right, to go to Capitol Hill and say, okay, we've got some really serious problems today. Okay, we need to start reducing some spending and really tighten our belts here. But by the way, you first, right? Because I've got my sacred cows, and we're not touching my stuff. I mean, it's just nuts, right? It sounds great. It's a great political soundbite, but that's not how we're going to get to the table with folks on both sides of the aisle, right? Just a few things to point out. One, when it comes to, and you're going to hear this a lot from Don and from Micah as well, how we need to, reinvigorate or re-energize our military spending here because of the sequester or whatever nonsense that, we don't spend enough on our military. Folks, we spend more than the next 8 countries combined on military spending. The next 8 largest militaries in the world, we trump them. Just us. Okay, so when folks tell you we don't spend enough on military spending, I think you need to take that with a grain of salt. Thanks.
Mr. Blaze?
So the question could really be rephrased as we have an economy that's premised on a decade of war. Those wars are slowing down. What can we do now? I would respond that if an economy premised on war is suffering, good. If it's teetering on the edge of the cliff, I'd like to kick it off. An economy based on killing people in faraway places is not productive and it's not sustainable. And I mean, it's good for some people. I have a high-level security clearance, and I'm overpaid by about $25,000 a year because of that clearance. But again, that's an example of a market distortion, something that's not sustainable, that's not grounded in productivity. That economy needs to end. We have the smartest workforce in the country in Northern Virginia, the most highly educated workforce. We can build a new economy on green jobs, on healthcare, on high tech. But again, our economy does need to change, and it might be painful, and that's a good thing. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Well, if anybody saw the Washington Post this morning, they would have seen that there was a great article on independence and how independents are rising. And one of the things that the Post said, that they quoted somebody, and he said, if you have a losing team, which is what we have in Congress right now, in 5 years we have a losing team, you can either get used to it or you can get new players. And this is where we need to be. Yes, we need a budget. When was the last time we got a decent budget? When was the last time that we got a budget without a threat of a shutdown or an actual shutdown? I mean, think about this. Congress is broken, and we need to fix it. We have problems in Northern Virginia. Yes, we lost a huge opportunity to have a Silicon Valley here. AOL started here, Northern Virginia Technology Conference that Don was involved in. There was a lot of missed opportunities here, and I think we need to go back and address why we had those missed opportunities. We have 30% office space vacancy on average here. Why is that? How come the technology companies aren't coming here and they're going to Silicon Valley? I mean, and that's going to be more of a state issue than a national issue. But I think that we need to get more involved in education for the STEM students, which is science, technology, engineering, and math. We need to make sure that that's set. We need to look at ways to diversify. Look at our district. Who is the best in the district at tourism? And we're what, 2, 3 in the world to attract tourists? And they all go to Washington, D.C.? Alexandria does a great job, but we don't see many tourists in Springfield. We don't see many tourists in Arlington, although we have a rich history in that we could put in museums and we could have some wonderful things to promote new businesses. So we have our existing businesses, we have new businesses. Yes, we're going to come down a little bit because we're coming off of a huge war. And one war that is just about ended. Hopefully we're going to keep troops in Afghanistan. But we need to get a little bit more back into this and look at some of our businesses that, oh, I'm out of time. Okay, we'll finish it later. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, it's time for another question. This question will go first to Mr. Carson. Oh! I wasn't going to do that. I'm sorry.
I won't take it personally. He'll help you out. You are welcome. All right, lots of commentary. Let's get into the specifics. Anyone here attend that lecture that Fuller gave? It was a couple of weeks ago, actually, in McLean at Capital One. This is what he talked about. Specifically was, sort of where the question was that we are feeling a squeeze here in Northern Virginia because part of it's the cutback with sequestration, part of it is the fact that the economy is not diversified, and we also have an infrastructure problem. So let's take them one by one and be specific. First, everyone here talked about the budget, but they didn't really specifically mention anything about it. We currently don't have a budget. At the federal level, the budget only goes through December, so the first person that comes in is going to have to deal with the budget. To actually give us a budget that moves through the end of the fiscal year, which will be September. Now, Virginia State Legislature has actually already done something about it, meaning the fact that, as Fuller pointed out and Governor McAuliffe has pointed out, that we're about $2.4 billion hole due to Congress' responsibility for the next 5 years. The legislature of Virginia just got together and actually came up with $800 million in painful cuts to make up for what Congress has failed to do in its current budget. Second thing is, no one else talked about it here, transportation. Virginia has about $1 billion a year in its transportation fund that funds projects all around Northern Virginia, around the state, particularly here in Northern Virginia, where the infrastructure grid needs to be in place so that we can actually get businesses to relocate from other places to here or to help businesses grow. Congress left out of session without passing a fix for the Highway Transportation Fund. So that means also that someone here should be talking about transportation. And the third thing is sequestration. That budget is going to solve the budget through the fiscal year, and then sequestration is going to kick in again in October 1 of next year. So that is going to be another $50 billion hit. And just so that you know, Virginia is the top state that actually receives federal dollars with respect to defense. So that's absolutely the most powerful whole. And we have to worry about diversifying our economy around that. So these are problems that I want to take a leadership role in, but more importantly, have been doing these things already at the federal level. Thank you.
Now, okay, the next question, the first responder will be Mr. Carson. Do you think the U.S. needs a law that mandates equal pay for equal work?
Hi again, excuse me. So we already have a law. We have a constitutional amendment, the 14th Amendment, Equal Protection Clause, and we have the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that says you can't be discriminated against because of your race, sex, national origin, et cetera, age. So look, folks, this equal pay for equal work, let's just call it what it really is. It's a great political soundbite for Democrats. That's exactly what it is, because it sounds fantastic. It'd be like me saying, I want to eliminate meanness in the world. I think I'm going to legislate that. I'm going to legislate that we're going to end all meanness. But let's think about how that might actually work, right? How that might actually work, equal pay for equal work, okay? Think about it for a second. I'm going to give you a hypothetical. Let's say Gwendolyn and I work at the same company, right? We get the same job title. Now, Gwendolyn's a go-getter. She's in early. She stays late. She's a top salesperson. She brings in lots of revenue. She is the best employee they've got. I'm kind of a slacker, right? I show up late. I don't show up on Wednesdays because it's hump day and I don't feel like working on Wednesdays. So, you know, the fact that we have to be paid the exact same amount of money because we have the same role, right, it's just silly. It's silly that you would take that kind of power away from the employer and give it to the federal government. I mean, and then if you think, well, sure, but, you know, but it's taken advantage of today. Sure it is. Bad employers, folks out there that are doing things they shouldn't be doing, don't you think they're going to figure out a way to loophole the system to continue doing those things? I mean, how difficult would it be for them to just say, well, okay, we want to pay you more than Gwendolyn, so we're just going to give you a different job title. I mean, there's 8 million loopholes here. At the end of the day, this is what it's going to accomplish. It's going to accomplish a lot of legislation, a lot of complexity, and a lot of compliance and complexity costs for all businesses, right? For all businesses. And what does that do? That hurts job creation, that hurts economic growth. There's no other way around it. But it's a great political soundbite for Democrats. Okay, thanks.
Mr. Blaze?
So first off, there is a lot of sexism and just as bad, a lot of ageism in the market right now. It's terrible. But the idea of dictating salaries is a bad one. It wouldn't work. I mean, if the government dictates salary, what does a private enterprise even mean? One of the things I'm fighting for, universal health care, would partially address this problem in that a lot of us stay at our jobs because of our benefits, because of our health care, because it's difficult to leave. If we had universal health care, it'd be easier to leave your job, easier to start your own business. This would decrease friction in the market and improve employment opportunities for everyone. Thank you.
Ms. Beck?
I know what it feels like to be discriminated against. I know what it feels like to have the slacker who's in the office with me who makes more. He still makes more, and he gets the accounts, right? This is the reality of the real world, and the women who are business women in this room know it. We have lived it. One time, they laid off all the women in my company by accident on the trading floor, every single woman. We know what it feels like, right, ladies? So I say absolutely, I am for equal pay. I think that there are issues that need to be worked out to ensure that it is equal pay. But I think it's a mindset. I mean, I look at my mother and my grandmother. My grandmother was one of the very first women to go to college, and certainly the first female in my family. She went to NYU. And I know what it feels like. She was a teacher, so she was in a female profession, and I've got a lot of aunts who are teachers, and cousins, actually. So I know what it feels like. I've heard the stories my whole life. I've seen my mother fight the glass ceiling. I've fought the glass ceiling myself. And I know what it feels like when somebody says, oh, well, we're not going to pay you as much because you're going to leave and have children, which is just terrible, which is, well, we had that discussion at one of the other forums. You should have been there, Dawn. I needed your help because I know you're on the same page with me as this. But I think we need to continue to fight for women's rights. I've said this before, especially our right to choose to make decisions with our own bodies. And thank you, I'm 100% for female rights.
Thank you. Mr. Edmond?
Thank you. Some specifics. No one's against men and women having equal pay for equal work. As Mr. Carson said, we actually have a lot of laws on the books that deal with that. One of the problems I hear most often from women who are professionals is it's that problem, the way that corporations tend to look at women when they enter the workforce. Unfortunately, they look at men as probably going to stay there for a while. They look at women as being more transient. And so therefore, they don't tend to make those long-term investments. That is something that you can't legislate. What you can do is that women are looking for help in that workforce when they're doing things like trying to find more flexibility. They fought very long, very hard for a certain position. Maybe they do want to have a child. Maybe they want to take some time off. So they're looking for specific types of things like telecommuting and things like that. Those types of laws, particularly with respect to the Defense Department that has 800,000 civilian employees in an area like this, are absolutely important. Things like child care tax credit increases allow women to continue to keep their job and have a child and without having to go out of that workforce, so don't lose their seniority. These are specific things that I hear for women who are fighting these challenges and that we can legislate and that we can address and that are specific and that you can quantify. Everything else is really hyperbole. What we're looking for is to help these women maintain the positions that they have, or if they did have to come out of the workforce for some significant period of time, either with a child, you hear family child care, or care now for parents and stuff like that. The biggest thing that they're looking for is maybe even some help with some transition assistance to get back into the workforce having been out for a while. These are all very specific things that can help women to maintain positions or come back in without losing or having lost seniority. Thank you very much.
Mr. Byer?
You know, I respect my opponents, but sometimes I just deeply disagree. Decade after decade, we've made no progress in women as pay as a percentage of men. This is not a soundbite. This is a very real issue. 1/4 of households in America women are the primary breadwinners. And the statistic in 2014 is that women in the exact same job as men make 70 cents for a dollar. And virtually every woman I know sees the reality of this. One of the ways this is also expressed is 70% of the minimum wage workers in this country are women. Interestingly, the U.S. government and the U.S. military are the two places where women do best in terms of pay equity because they're on very transparent salaries. You can see they get to be a GS1, step 1, step 2, step 3, and it ends up being much fairer. The laws are not in place, Jeff. You can sue, and it takes years and years and years, but that rarely happens. And most women don't have the economic power to go sue. Let me give you some other examples. Corporate boards in America, only 16% of the board members on corporate boards are women. In the C-suites, CEOs, CFO, Chief Information Officer, Chief Marketing Officer, 6%. 1 in 16 are women. What happens with the women right now, I've got 3 daughters, so I'm very much into this. And they go into the track, and they start in a good job, and they grow. But if they get married and they want to have children, when they come back, they're put into the mommy track, which doesn't mean they're ever going to make it to be CEO or COO or on the corporate board. So we desperately need this Equal Fair Pay Act. By the way, I'm very proud that we have paid maternity leave in my family business. I think we're the only car dealer in the country to do that because we want to attract good women and we want them to grow all the way along the way. By the way, my wife is right now, her 80 hours a week is on something called EDGE certification, which is trying to get corporations to voluntarily put more women on the boards because she has a simple idea. This is proved by study after study that corporations with more women in leadership are more profitable.
Okay, this question starts with Mr. Blaze. Okay. Illegal immigration is a huge problem, especially all the school-age children that we've received in this area. The cost to school and other services and the strains for the code compliance officers is huge. Would you ask for federal funds to help local areas that are suffering under this situation?
Well, I advocate opening up the borders and letting in anyone who's not a felon, which is a pretty radical position. I think our immigration laws tend to be racist. Everyone should be allowed in if they're not going to commit a violent crime, if they have no history of doing such. Again, and I would reject the premise of the question. I'm not sure that illegal immigrants are a burden. In fact, you'll find that with cheap labor and consumption of services, they are a net gain. So again, the question is faulty. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, okay, I'll read the question again. I'm kind of editing here as I go along. Illegal immigration is a huge problem in the area, especially all the minors that have been brought into this area. Yes, sir, okay. It's huge costs of schools. There's also costs in code compliance. Would you ask for federal funding for these area for these problems?
Yes. Yes, I would. We've got a lot of children coming across the borders. I am the first one to say that if a child is traumatized or a part of a human slavery ring or is part of a gang warfare and has their life in danger, please do come to the United States of America. This is what we're built on. We're built on freedom. We're built on justice, and we're built on peace, and we want them to come here. There is a huge strain. Can you really ask yourself if a child is in trouble that you don't mind paying a few extra dollars for the school system? There are code compliances, which we'll have to do. Yes, I think Virginia should ask the federal government for money, but I am the first one to not turn a child away. There is a problem, though, because not all children are in trouble. There's a lot of people out there who think that we should take care of their children. So I would say to them, do not mistake kindness for weakness. We don't want to babysit your children for you. If the child is really in trouble, we'll take care of them. My godson is an orphan now. His father was diagnosed with ALS when he was 4 years old, and his mother knew something was wrong but didn't do anything about it because the dad was sick and unfortunately died suddenly. So we had a 4-year-old who carried a cell phone around. And I wanted him to come and live with me, and right now he's an orphan and he's with his aunt and uncle in Columbus, Ohio. We have to take care of these kids. And I would say yes to the question, absolutely.
Thank you. Mr. Edmond?
To be a little bit more specific about what we're dealing with here is you have a federal immigration law. And under federal immigration law, we have gaps. And under those gaps, we have individuals that are now arriving at the border. They're being checked at the border. And then we're making some decisions that those children should be enrolled in public schools. The states right now, as everyone knows, roughly 90% of education at the local school level, K through 12, is paid for by the states. So the states are saying because the federal government has refused to handle its immigration laws, and then they're making sure that those students go to these schools, then the burden of funding it and the compliance goes on to the states. So the states are left in a situation of, do we raise local property taxes to accommodate that, since the federal government's telling us that they have to go to school, or do we ask the federal government for the dollars? Personally, no. I don't want the states to have to deal with that problem in terms of costs, and I don't think they should go to the federal government for it either. I think that the federal government's focus needs to be on the immigration reform. The immigration reform will prevent the problem. As it is right now, everyone's just kicking the can down the road. So specifically, the things that we need to do is make sure that we aren't adding undue burden to the school system. You can add a couple of $1 million, however you want to look at it, to enforce some code, but you still haven't dealt with the underlying problem that's affecting education. The student-teacher ratio is going to go through the roof astronomically. If you ask any school teachers, that's the problem. It's not so much as the code problems and this and that. It's the fact that everyone knows quality education is doing that student-teacher ratio and resources and things like that. If you don't deal with that problem, you're not going to improve public schools. You can toss a few more money at $1 million at code, but it won't solve the quality of education. And that is underwritten by the fact that the federal government has to handle its responsibility in immigration. Thank you.
Mr. Byer?
I think my friend Mike offers some important insights that this begins with immigration reform. You know, the good news was the U.S. Senate last year in a bipartisan fashion passed comprehensive immigration reform, a good law. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to get the U.S. House of Representatives to take it up. The challenge is that we have roughly 12 to 13 million people here without documentation. And we want to try to create a path for citizenship for those who are paying taxes, who are working hard, who are obeying the law, who are raising their families here. I think a first step would be actually to provide documentation. We call them illegal aliens. No person's illegal. These are simply people without documentation. We also need to look at not making their children pay. Happily, Texas, under Governor Perry, has made sure that every child there has a right to a state education. We were fighting for the DREAM Act in Virginia and at the federal level. These are good things. But we also have to respect, with respect to Jerry, that we can't just open the borders up. We are a country, and countries by definition have borders. When I was ambassador in Switzerland, we would do 28,000 visas a year. I'm just trying to control who from Switzerland, who were very different, coming and going, that the right people were coming at the right time. By the way, one of the commitments I've made, if I'm elected, is to go down and visit those border camps. I've heard from people who've been there that they will break your heart, the way we were keeping mothers and children there. And then the next step is to go to Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador, and look at conditions in those countries. Almost none of these unaccompanied children are coming from Mexico, which has a much stronger economy. They're coming from war-torn places with very high murder rates, terrible gang problems, and great, great poverty. This is where we as Americans can lead to help try to solve those problems, which in turn takes all the pressure off having to try to come to the United States.
Okay, so the answer to the question would be no, I don't, because that's not going to solve the problem. What's going to solve the problem, as several of my colleagues have mentioned, comprehensive immigration reform. Now, I have a different idea of what comprehensive immigration reform looks like than my two establishment candidates over here, but there's no question that we need comprehensive immigration reform. The reason why we have an illegal immigration problem today is because it's so darn complicated and nearly impossible to get here legally, right? Look, Jerry and I, okay, I'm not going to speak for Jerry. He can tell you his own position here, but I am as open immigration as it gets. It doesn't mean that I don't support a secure border. In fact, today we spend more on border security than we've ever spent in the history of this country. It means that we need to make it far simpler and easier for honest, hardworking people that just want to come here to make a better life for themselves and their family, to pursue the American dream, to actually come here and do that legally. To do that legally and to pay taxes legally, right? Anyone that tells you that this is not good for our economy, that on net it's bad, is wrong. Economically, the vast majority of economists are going to tell you this is very good for our economy. It stimulates job growth. The pie gets bigger, so to speak, right? There's not just a set size pie that we get to divvy out for all of us, okay? The pie gets bigger, it's very good for our economy, and it's an absolute must if we have any hope in tackling our fiscal nightmare that we face today. We absolutely must get people here working legally, paying taxes legally. I would agree that we absolutely need a pathway to citizenship. It needs to be straightforward, it needs to be simple, it needs to be clear. And finally, I don't think you can do any of this unless you put incentives in the right place. So the caveat here is this: if you are a non-citizen, I don't believe you should have access to our welfare state. That's how this works, folks. That's the only way that we disincentivize folks that we really don't want coming here, and we incentivize folks that are coming here. We turn off that spigot, if you will, but we make it far easier for folks to come to work and pursue the American dream. Thanks.
Okay, this question starts with Ms. Beck. What would you do? Oh, no. Okay. Phew. Okay. All right. All right, good. What would you do to stop discrimination against older workers?
Well, it's a big challenge, and it's a big problem for older workers. And I certainly think that people that are in place, there are some laws that are there, and I think we need to fine-tune some of those laws. One of the other problems is that we have to make sure that there is a pathway that if somebody is discriminated against or laid off their job and it affects a pension that's owed to them from the corporation or from the business that they work for, that there's a good recourse for it. And I do think, once I've mentioned this, that I think a promise is a promise, and that the pensions that have been promised should stay in place. And right now, the Pension Protection Act of 2006 does a lot to ensure that if something does happen to a company, that the person is still going to get their pension. I also believe, while we're talking about the older people, that a promise is a promise, and that this Congress has tried to balance the budget on the backs of some of the military. They did cut into their pensions. It was only 1%. But I think that there should be some things that are sacred, and I think the military and the federal worker pensions should be protected. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edmond.
Thank you. Yes, it is a problem. I hear 2 to 3 specific things a lot when I go around, when I talk to senior Americans. One of those particularly is the Older Americans Act that has been bipartisan, endorsed, but can't get it passed right now. And I think that they're looking for individuals to step up and vote for that, which I support. Another one is actually I think it's the POAD by acronym, which is it's against the older Americans. And disabilities is another area, particularly in the disabilities, because there are a lot of individuals who actually want to work but find themselves sort of trapped into that loophole where they're getting a disability payment capped at one amount, and then when they try and work, then the federal government wants to cut back that penalty. So you have senior Americans and disabled Americans who actually want to do some work, and they're not getting the proper incentives to do so. So these are things where I see that there's existing legislation, is actually pending. We just need men and women to get elected and actually stand up and produce those. And I would. Thank you.
Mr. Byer.
As the only candidate here with grandchildren, I want to make sure that we enforce anti-discrimination against older candidates. So number one, obviously we need to enforce the laws. There are decent laws on the books. Sometimes they're ignored, so whenever we find that the opportunity to enforce, we should. I totally agree with Micah that we need to support the Older Americans Act. Number two, we need to understand that many older folks now, especially post-retirement in their retirement age job, are working for minimum wage. So if we can raise the minimum wage from $7.25 to $10.10, that will affect an awful lot of Americans. The third big thing is, as we talk about not kicking the can down the road and having the backbone to stand up and balance our budget and all the things that make for good sound bites, we need to make absolutely sure that we don't do it on the backs of older Americans. I'm against chain CPI. Chain CPI is a sort of a nice accounting trick, but it works to reduce the federal budget deficit or make Social Security more solvent in the short run because it pays less money to seniors. A lot of folks talk about raising the retirement age. I always thought that was perfectly fine. I think I'll be able to work well into my 80s. But I also work with about 100 mechanics in the family business. At age 60, they're tired. They've been lifting transmissions and bending over cars all their life. And at 60 and 62, we usually have to find different jobs for them because they can't do what they've been doing all their lives. There are things that we can do with Social Security, perhaps means tested for the wealthiest and things like that. But we need to make absolutely sure that the discrimination that it impacts older Americans doesn't really happen. By the way, my very first campaign for Congress, I worked with Claude Pepper. Some of you may remember him. He was the great champion for older Americans, and I hope to lead in his stead.
Mr. Carson.
Yes. So my answer here is going to be pretty brief because it's very similar to the answer I gave for equal pay for equal work. Obviously, I'm no fan of discrimination in any way, shape, or form. There's no question about that. I actually agree with what Don Byer said here and with what Micah said, which is that there are laws in the books today and they should be enforced, period. I do want to touch on a few things that Don actually said, though. One, he said raising the minimum wage would be very beneficial for a number of people, except for the up to 500,000 people that lose their jobs, except for those people that the CBO outlined that said up to 500,000 people will lose their jobs if we raise it from $7.25 to $10.10. I wonder who's watching out for them. Two, a point that Don Beyer brought up in the earlier question when he brought up the chaos and the violence in Central America, right? This was in response to immigration. I would love for him to explain why he thinks that violence exists today, because I can tell you why it exists to the extent that it does, and it is our drug war, right? Interdiction efforts throughout Central America, and especially throughout South America, have really just been whack-a-mole for all of these major global cartels that are raining chaos, and right now the chaos is in Honduras, it's in Nicaragua, it's in other parts of Central America. There's a reason why these parents are sending their, tens of thousands of kids unaccompanied across a 1,000-mile journey that's fraught with danger on the hopes that if they just make it into the border, across the border, that we'll let them stay, right? It's not because the parents are dumb. It's because it is that bad there today that they're willing to take this risk, all right? There's no question that our drug war plays a huge part in this by empowering these massive criminal syndicates by funding them effectively, okay? If we end the drug war, that goes a very long way into helping us solve our immigration problem, and especially in regards to the children on the border that are coming across. I think that's all I've got. Thank you.
Mr. Blaze.
Great answer. It's very tough to follow. So my mainstream political opponents would have you believe that it's as simple as passing a law. Just pass a law saying hire old people, don't discriminate, and that then the discrimination will end. That's silly and that's backward. It's ignorant. Companies figure out how to game the system. They'll use the laws to their advantage. Following those laws will actually be difficult for small companies who can't afford legal defense to protect themselves. It doesn't really help the seniors or small companies. If we really want to help seniors, let's try more freedom. If you're collecting, if you're working instead of collecting Social Security, let's lower your taxes by the amount of that Social Security. Let's incentivize you to keep working. Or again, let's make it easier to start companies. Let's make it easier for seniors to start companies. You can hire each other. There'll be more jobs for you to find. So again, if the choice is between more freedom or another law, I think we should always go with more freedom to address a problem. Thank you.
Thank you. One more question. Okay, we have one more question before we have to do a break. This question is going to start with Mr. Edmund. It has been said that no man can serve two masters. Candidates for public office accept campaign contributions from donors who generally expect something in return. How can you serve both the citizens of District 8 and your campaign contributors? Mr. Edmund.
Specifically, candidates have to raise some dollars to, at its very core, print up the basic of materials, and if they want to, go out and do what I've done, which is go door to door. You have to raise the money, unless, of course, you're independently wealthy. So most average Americans are not, so you're going to have to raise the money. The money's going to come from campaign donations. I think that in reality, it's not a fair thing to say is that anyone that receives a campaign donation is automatically beholden totally to the interests of the people who donate the money. I think that we have seen records of people with great public service, and they've done great things, and they have not been in the pocket of people who donated money. You'll also find that one of the greatest groups, right, that actually raises money and gets involved in the process is the AARP. And there are other great groups out there that advocate for great things. Teachers, public service workers, so on and so forth. So I don't think that it's necessarily that anybody that receives a campaign donation is bought and sold by the person that gave it. I would be more concerned about looking at what that individual does. And the reality is the fact that, quite frankly, you're looking to see what that person does to engage you, money or not. Do they actually come to your door? Do they think that money is enough to run a TV commercial or do a mailing and never actually show up and see you? That's the question. And then at what level? Is it 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, 40 million? Where do you get upset about it? Is it because you saw 2 commercials, you saw 1 commercial? Or is it really you're looking for the simple metric, whether someone raised money or not, is that did they actually engage you? And the simplest way to do that, quite frankly, is with the least amount of money to go out door to door. That's what it used to all be about. Personal relationship between someone coming to you and asking you for your vote. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the focus, and that's a simple test. 1 million, 5 million, doesn't really matter. Thank you.
Mr. Byer.
This is a good question, and I've been dealing with this for a long time. I ran statewide 3 times, twice for lieutenant governor and once for governor, and I lost. And in that time, I probably raised $15 million. Virginia has no limits. They have disclosure beyond $99, but you can give a lot much more. And in all those years, 9.5 years, I never had anyone ask me to do something illegal or immoral or even for their own benefit. And that was a wonderful thing. Now that we're running for Congress, the limit is $2,600 per person. Average congressional candidate campaign probably costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe even $1 million. $2,600 is not a very big percentage of it. No one's really going to throw away their credibility, their morality, their ethics for $2,600. And instead, the way I've looked at it is, it's just too little money. And I've often been so proud that up until this last couple of months, Virginia was the only state east of the Mississippi River that had never sent a statewide official to prison, never been indicted. And I'm sad to say that's not the case at the moment, but it's been very, very clean, and I like that. And in fact, I've had a different perspective on raising money. The campaigns are message and message delivery. You have to be able to tell your story, whether you're a libertarian or an Equal Party or Republican, and you need a little bit of money to put it in literature or on signs or on radio or television. So our job in raising money is simply to give people an opportunity to participate in politics. Very few of us have the opportunity to run, but most of us would like to be involved in politics in some way. Some can knock on doors, some can make phone calls, some people can write a $100 check or even a $2,600 check. And that's the way they get to express their values and hope that they're expressed in the American democracy.
Thank you. I'll tell you what, Don, if money's not that important, I'll take a few $100,000 from you right now. I could really use it. So, look, folks, if there's anyone in the race, right, that's going to say, yes, we want campaign finance reform, yes, we want it now because we want to even the playing field, you'd think it would be me, right? You'd think it'd be the third-party candidate. I've got news for you. I do agree. I do think we need campaigns finance reform, but not the way that you might think. And it's a little counterintuitive, but I'll explain. First, I'd love to get money out of politics. Wouldn't that be great? Just sounds wonderful, right? Let's just run on the issues. Let's run on who we are as people, on our values. But quite frankly, I don't think there's a way to do it without really infringing upon all of our constitutional rights. All right, in particular the First Amendment, right? The idea that the federal government can tell you how to spend your hard-earned dollars and what you can and cannot spend it on, I just fundamentally disagree with it. And that's coming from someone that would love to see the playing field leveled out, because as much as Don wants to tell you that money's not that big of a deal, $2.5 million really helps out quite a bit. So look, this is what I've learned, and I didn't always know this until I started running, but this is what I've learned when it comes to campaign finance laws on the books today. They actually hurt third-party candidates. They actually hurt folks like me because they make my life miserable. Do you have any idea how complicated the FEC and trying to deal with these people and trying to go through all of the mountain of complexity? And $2,600 a pop, that might sound, it doesn't sound like a lot to Don. It's a lot to me, right? But I'll tell you, it's for someone like me that doesn't have a Rolodex full of 100, 200 people that can all donate that kind of money, it's very, very difficult to actually raise funds, right? If there was no limit, I could spend a month or two focusing on one individual, say, look, I need 50 grand, that's going to allow me to run a legitimate campaign, and now I can run. But with the complexity of the laws today on the books and these limits, they actually make third-party candidates' lives more difficult, and they don't level the playing field. They actually sway it towards these guys. So thank you.
Mr. Blaze.
Have you ever wondered why big party politicians say one thing and then when in office do another? Why there's such an extreme gap? It's because they don't work for you. They talk to you and they want your votes, but they don't work for you. At the end of the day, they work for their donors. They work for the people who give them money. When you need help from Congressman Michael one day, and the big bank Mike used to work for also needs his help, who do you think he's going to take the time to talk to? It won't be you. It's actually not that expensive to run a campaign. The Twitter, the Facebook, they're free. You can do a good job. Jeff is actually a great example of that. And finally, I would add, I'm not taking donations from anybody. I'm not independently wealthy. I'm just operating on a shoestring budget, and I'm self-financed. Therefore, there will be zero discrepancy between what I say and what I do. Thank you.
I agree with Jerry. I've never run for office before, but it's actually shocking how little money it takes. Sure, we have to get the signs and we have to get some flyers and brochures out, and we've got some bumper stickers. And I hope everybody gets a pink band. We're dedicated to cancer awareness, so we've got all the pink bands over here. We weren't allowed to pass them out, so please do stop and get one. We've got yard signs. Think about Eric Kanter and David Bratt's campaign. David Bratt spent $280,000. David Kanter rose north of $5 million and spent $280 on steak dinners, restaurants in Washington, D.C. 280,000. Thank you. So if you take out the steak dinners and you taking out all the campaign workers and you take out the big salaries, it's not that expensive. And it's freedom. I mean, one of the things I love about Virginia is I saw an opportunity where I thought I could make a difference. And I went out and researched the campaign laws and did what I had to do to get on the ballot. So how spectacular is that? That anybody could. And I was actually shocked that there were only 5 people that were on the ballot. So I would say to everybody, it doesn't take that much to run a campaign. If all you're getting is commercials every 4 or 5 minutes on the television and flyers every single day in your mailbox, you're not having a good candidate and you're not being a good American. You need to look at the candidates and see what they represent, because money doesn't vote, people vote. And it's important that we all stand up and take our right as Americans to vote, because there are people fighting and dying in the rest of the world that would love to be able to vote and have freedom.
Thank you. That's right. Okay. All right. This is a question for Mr. Byer. Given that Congress has a reputation for not getting things done because of, at least in part, party allegiances rather than actually in a bipartisan manner for the good of the country, how do you propose changing the atmosphere in Congress and helping restore its reputation?
Thank you. That is really very much at the heart of why I chose to run this year. We were overseas in Switzerland when the debt ceiling debate came up. And it was so difficult to explain to Europeans who loved and admired the United States why our Congress was so broken. And I figured I could stay home and be angry and frustrated and embarrassed. Or I could raise my hand and go try to be a person that helps to heal it. That we get to a tipping point one person at a time. Because there are many good Republicans and many good Democrats there who would like to work together and get things done. As my friend Mark Warner says, neither party has a monopoly on patriotism or love of country. And it's interesting, Gwen talked about the Politico poll where they said a majority of Americans think we're on the right track. If you go deeper into that poll, you find that most of that wrong track sense is because it looks at Congress and says we have big problems. Balancing the budget, Ebola, dealing with ISIS, Social Security, immigration reform, et cetera, and we don't seem to be able to move forward. But you only have to look back a few years. Just in the last few years, we have passed the Affordable Care Act and brought insurance to 30 million more Americans, 10 million who never had insurance before. We have done Dodd-Frank, which should keep us hopefully from the next major recession, financial recession, the too big to fail. In the last 6 years, we are the #1 developed country in the world in reducing our carbon dioxide emissions. When the president took over, we were at 10% unemployment on the way to 15%. It's now down to 5.9%. And with all due respect to the many deficit hawks on this panel, 4 years ago, our deficit was 10% of GDP. It was a $1.4 trillion budget deficit per year. It will now be under $500 billion this year, down to 2.8% and on its way down. Healthcare costs are rising at the slowest level in decades and decades. So there's a lot that we can do, and there'll be much more that we can do when Democrats and Republicans talk to each other, work together, and decide that we can fix America together.
Thank you. Mr. Carson?
Ooh, this is going to be a fun one. All right. I think actually we're going to see fairly much eye to eye on this, my colleagues over here. But listen, first, Congress is broken. Good God, Congress is broken. And there's 2 big reasons why. One, the hyperpartisanship. Of course, we've been seeing it now for years. Do we really think that's going to get any better, continuing to vote for Team Red or Team Blue? I mean, do we really think so? Rhetoric aside, is that really the answer? Let's vote for more insanity because, it's worked before. Very likely not. I suppose it's possible, right? I've believe in unicorns and fairy dust sometimes too, but it's very unlikely that voting for more Republicans and Democrats is going to get us to where we need to go. That's just the hard truth. Two, I have to, so on that note, good God, you know, I want your vote more than anything, right? But if I'm too much for you, or if you're not going to vote for me for whatever reason, please consider these guys. Jerry and Gwendolyn, good folks. You know, they'd be great congressmen here in Virginia 8, so please just consider a non-major party candidate if you're not going to consider me, although I really would appreciate your vote. Two things, one, that Don mentioned. One, the ACA is a lot of things, but I don't think it's an example of bipartisanship, Don. And two, the other example you gave, Dodd-Frank, good God. Dodd-Frank, look, you know, we've got, Dodd-Frank is the financial regulation that's supposed to reign in Wall Street. Okay, so let's see, a few years later now, Dodd-Frank was 2010, we're 4 years later, we've got fewer banks, they're larger, and they are more risky, i.e. they have more derivatives on their books than they ever had before, which means that they pose more of a systemic risk to our financial system than ever before. Dodd-Frank did not end too big to fail, it institutionalized it, right? So if that's your example of bipartisanship, oof, my. And the last piece about deficits, he's right. We're down right under 3% of GDP for this year's deficit. But that's like saying stealing $500 billion from our kids is fine, because 3 years ago it was 500 billion, right? Because a few years ago it was 1.5 trillion. That's just nuts, folks. We got to stop this. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Blaze.
So Congress has a bad reputation. And frankly, Congress should have a bad reputation. Congress is broken, and it's broken because it's filled with Republicans and Democrats. Sending somebody from Wall Street or sending somebody who raised a lot of money for the president, we've done these things before. Has it ever worked? Has anybody looked at their congressional representation in the past decade and said, this Republican-Democrat paradigm is it, this is perfect, this is what I want, let's keep doing what we've always done? Has anybody in the room had that thought? I haven't. I felt the opposite. I felt so strongly the opposite that I was inspired to run. I recently took my car to get fixed at a gas station down the street. I won't say the name. They didn't fix it, and they charged me $500. I took it to them. They didn't fix it again, and they charged me another $500. So I was at $1,000. I took it to another mechanic who fixed it for $300. I should have taken it there the first time. So here's our traditional mechanic, right? Except we're not out $1,000. We're out $3 trillion just for the past 10 years of war alone, and who knows where they're going to go next. We have to stop empowering these guys. We can't keep feeding the bad mechanic. And so what do? Let's have a third-party voice. Let's throw in a libertarian. Let's throw in Gwendolyn. Let's throw in the Independent Green Party. Let's try something different. We all know the definition of insanity. It's trying the same thing again and again and again. Thank you.
George Washington warned us when he left the White House. George Washington, the father of this country. It was a big deal when he left the White House, because at the time he could have stayed and been king of the United States of America. So it was a true show of democracy. And what he said, and I'll paraphrase, is beware of political factions getting too much power. And here we are in 2014. And I'll say it again, it doesn't matter what your resume looks like. We've got two talented people here. I'd love to see Don Beyer go into philanthropy and let a woman who needs a job have a job. With equal pay? Hey, that's true. It'll be the one place I could get equal pay, right? Actually, I don't need the job, but I would love to represent the 8th District of Virginia. But George Washington warned us, and there are no independents in the House of Representatives right now. We need to do this. The Affordable Care Act, yes, it was packed. It was shoved down your throat because the Republicans had won the House, and Nancy Pelosi knew that if she did not get that bill passed between the time of the election and the end of the year, it was never going to get passed. So everybody knows the famous saying, passed, she walked out and she said, okay, we passed it, we'll see what's in it later. These are the kind of bills we're getting. We're having Dodd-Frank parties in London because our financial services industries are moving over there. We're having corporations trying to get their headquarters out of the United States of America because we cannot fix our corporate tax rate. We spend millions and millions and billions of dollars sending ambassadors like Mr. Beyer to Europe and all around the world to get them to encourage the countries to buy U.S. goods. And what happens? We tax them 35% to bring any money that they make overseas back into the United States of America. And in a lot of places, they have to pay the local tax too. So that is the definition of insanity. So,
Mr. Edmond?
Thank you. Back to the question, specifically what you would do. First, it starts with your own personal temperament. You can complain and you can talk about people, or you can actually step up and work across the aisle. I've actually done that. And to a certain degree, you've heard some of the things that Mr. Byer said here today, and he's done it too. It's called being an adult. It's not complaining, but it's actually having a demonstrated record of something that you can stand on at issues at this level that we're talking about. Personal temperament. I was a Republican staffer with the Defense Armed Services Committee and with the Veterans Affairs Committee. But when President Obama said we need the very best to work on our Simpson Bowles program, and I was asked, I took the job. Why? Because that's personal temperament. That's when your president asks you to serve, to walk across the aisle and do something for the greater good, you do it. And I did. I did it again when the super committee called a year later and said we want to work on this problem. It's stepping across the aisle and demonstrating my personal temperament. 2, next thing that you do, there's a reason there's no independents in the House of Representatives. People always tell you they want to be independent. That's nonsense. You get to the House of Representatives, and first vote, you have to vote with either the majority or the minority. You have to caucus with somebody. That's how you get your committee assignment, right? So you're going to be with Republicans or Democrats regardless, because you have to get a committee assignment. If you want to serve this district, then the leader of your party is the person you're going to have to ask to get on the committee that best represents your district so you can do the district's work. Everything else is conversation. And the third thing is just this. The biggest thing that you can look for out of a representative is someone that says, why don't they put on the floor something that's already happened in California? It is to take the politics out of it, to demand that we pull the political process out of redistricting, that we put in independent boards across the country that'll do it. The reason you got people that show up and don't want to vote and work together in the House of Representatives is not because they're Republican or Democrats. It's absolutely because they are not in competitive districts at home. Thank you.
I just wanted to make one comment about insanity is doing the same thing over the same way and expecting a different result, has never tried to reboot your printer. Okay, my next question is for Mr. Carson. Starts out, what solutions do you propose to help this generation of students and their families manage student loan debt when many still cannot find good jobs in this difficult economy?
Thank you. Is this you again? No worries. So again, it's. Are we going to talk about symptoms, or are we going to talk about the actual root causes of the problems? Obviously, student debt. It's one of the many bubbles we have today, right? It's now over $1 trillion in student loan debt today, and that's awful. That's horrible. There's no question about that. But the question is, why do we have such crazy student debt, right? Why is it that tuition rates have skyrocketed, well past rates of inflation, right? What's the answer here? It's actually quite simple. It's government intervention where it doesn't belong. There's a fairly time-tested rule when it comes to economics. It's when the government steps in and subsidizes something, demand and cost of that thing go up. So that's precisely what's happened with education. There's a number of other things that the government's gotten wrong in education, but that's one of them. When the government comes in and subsidizes student loans and subsidizes tuition cost, what do you think the universities do? Do you think they say, okay, well, we're just going to treat this on net the same? No, they're going to say, well, now it's easier for these kids to afford tuition, so let's just jack up tuition rates. It's not that complicated, right? That's what we see today. I think Elizabeth Warren is championing some, and I'm guessing Don Byer might speak to this, is championing some relief for students today with student loans. It sounds great. It's great politics. Let's help our students and let's try to help them with the student loan debt. But at the end of the day, it doesn't solve the problem. The problem is the fact that the government got involved where it shouldn't have in the first place, and the problem is our sky-high tuition rates and the cost of higher education, right? A symptom, a cause, is our massive student loan bubble. But that's not the actual problem. The problem is government involvement in education in the first place, and the fact
you should be able to get the credits. Has everybody here heard of the Khan economy? Nobody? Okay. The Khan economy started. There was a fellow who had a niece. He was in New York. She was in Silicon Valley, and she was going to school, and she was having some problems with her math classes. So because of the time difference, he decided that he would tape himself and let her listen to her tutorial lesson on the tape. And it was so good that she let her friends listen to it. And then she asked him if he would be willing to do some of the other classes. And now we have an entire academy. And I have been trying to get this so students can take the Khan courses and that they can just test out and be able to get some type of a degree. And the question with the degree is not so much whether it's an accredited institution, it's whether or not an employer will hire someone with that degree and be willing to say, yes, they know the information, so I'm going to be willing to give them a job. I mean, we all have to remember that Bill Gates dropped out of college, right? So he saw something that he could do that wasn't there. Sam Walton didn't go to college. Did you go to college, Don? Yeah, okay. He's a multimillionaire, so we got to ask all the multimillionaires. No, I'm sure you did. I'm sorry, I should know that off the top of my head. But I think it's very important that we take care of our students. I mean, this is our future. The Congress sets the interest rates for the student. Right now, it's 205 basis points over the 10-year note, which is a usury rate. You can buy a house for less than that. And these poor students, even if their payback is $200 a month, which one of my campaign managers, Caitlin, is getting ready to pay that next month, it hurts. I mean, it hurts you. It's going to stop you from buying a car, unfortunately. It's going to probably put off buying a house. And I think that we need to be able to change this and change it fast.
Thanks. Mr. Edmond?
Thank you. So, the question again. Specifically, here's a scenario that we have. There are individuals K through 12 who have worked hard, but they don't come from wealthy families, and they get the opportunity to go to a nice public school or even an Ivy League school. That was me, age 17, 18, but I couldn't afford it. So my question then is, should I not have been able to go? Sure. I should have been able to get a loan, but what private individual is going to give me a loan to go to an Ivy League school at $20-something thousand a year? Was it going to happen? Was it going to happen? So therefore, I applaud the role of the federal government for playing this responsible role, which is stepping in and being a guarantor of the loan. It's the only way that people get student loans, because no one's going to give a 17-year-old a loan, right? Who's going to give me $100,000 to go to this school? They're not. So you get things like a Perkins loan and a Stafford loan. So let's talk about specifics of what we can do. I absolutely disagree with the latest budget from the Obama administration that cuts back Pell Grants for people like that. Those individuals like me could have used more. The higher the Pell Grant, which is based on financial need, then the less you have to borrow. Therefore, move on to the loans portion. So when you're looking at the loans, while you're in school, right now you get two types of loans. Some accrue interest and some don't. One of the things that we can do as a fix is we can hold off the accrual and the interest until they at least graduate, because the loan's rolling over every year. Third thing is Elizabeth Warren's bill, which is actually a pretty good bill. I don't agree with the specifics on how the pay for is, but at the end of the day, all she simply says is the fact that the federal government locked in these high interest rates, and now the market rate has dropped down, so let's allow the student to do what every homeowner gets to do, is refinance down at a lower rate. I absolutely support that. And the third thing is quite frankly, why not be in the public service role of allowing for the government to step in and pay for some of the loans of those individuals that want to engage in public service? That's something I believe in. Thank you.
Mr. Byer?
Well, first I wish Jerry had brought me his car the first time. I haven't done the research, but I was the only fully certified automobile mechanic ever to be a lieutenant governor in America. I doubt that I'll be the first certified mechanic to be in Congress, but this strikes home to me. I've got two children in college right now, one at Brown, one at Rice, and I know the tuition bills. But there's a lot of good news out there too. Forbes magazine last year did the top 50 universities in the world. 45 of them were in the United States. One of the reasons college is so expensive is because it's worth it. People who graduate from college make more than $1 million over the course of their lifetime than people who only graduate from high school. And you know that most colleges are in ferocious competition for students. They're trying to find every way they can to hold down their costs while still making it attractive to come. A lot of good things have been mentioned here. One is that college debt today is greater than all credit card debt. Pretty frightening. And it does have pretty negative impacts. It affects your credit score. College kids today have worse credit scores than they did a generation ago. They have the lowest percent of home ownership in about 40 years because of student debt. It's harder to buy cars. And most relevant, it's harder to start businesses. And we know that most job creation comes from new businesses, and it comes from younger people. So you're going to be more reluctant to max out your credit card and sleep on your couch if you've got to make a $2,000 or $3,000 payment every month. So there are good ideas out there. They need to be allowed to refinance, which they can't do today. We need to let them borrow at closer to 0% rather than 3.8, 3.9%. I love the idea of community service, where if they do a year or two of community service, they get a year or two of free college. My wife was on the community college board here in Virginia for a number of years and helped negotiate the so-called articulation agreements. You go to Nova for 2 years and get good grades. All those credits transfer over to William & Mary, University of Virginia, Virginia Tech. And almost every college I know does already take all the AP credits, the con credits, and things like that. There's much that we can do.
Thank you. Okay, a foreign policy question. And this will start with Mr. Blaze. The president has placed 1,400 troops on the ground to battle ISIS. President Kennedy did the same thing, kicking off the Vietnam War. Are we at war with ISIS? Does this require a vote in Congress? Mr. Blaze.
Thank you. Before I address this question, I'm just going to go back to Micah's response about the college tuition. You'll notice he suggested that the federal government act as a guarantor of loans. That means that even when the student can't pay their tuition or can't pay their loan, that the banks still get paid. So he's advocating a transfer of wealth from the government, from you, the taxpayers, to banks. So again, I would remind you to remember who they work for and to remember that it's not you. Now, on to ISIS. ISIS is a regional actor with regional capabilities and regional ambitions, no matter what the rhetoric says. Ahlan, ana ismi Jerry. Do we have any Arabic people tonight? Salam, Jerry Blaze hastam. Shama hubi damruz, or Farsi. I was lucky enough to study Arabic and Farsi during my years as an intelligence analyst, where again, for 8 to 10 hours a day, every day I read the classified reporting on these guys. ISIS is not a threat to us. You are more likely to die from a heart attack, a car accident, or to drown in your cereal bowl than you are to be killed by ISIS. So again, no, they're not a threat to us, and we should not get involved, and we should not be at war with them. Thank you.
Okay, because we want to be out, we have a time obligation. I would like to cut you down to 1.5 minutes rather than 2 minutes for the rest of you. I know it's hard for you. I know it's hard for you.
Concise and succinct, yes. ISIS. Should the president have to ask Congress? I think the way that the laws are written, I definitely approve of. They're in the Constitution. The president can invade a country if he feels it's necessary. I think as the commander-in-chief, the office of the president needs to be able to move quickly if they have to. Congress is the bank. Should Congress have to declare war? Yes. At what point is it just a military skirmish versus a war? That's another question. And it should be debated. I don't know if you guys noticed it, but Congress hasn't even been here. Let me tell you what, I live next door to a congressman. He left town so fast he didn't cancel his newspaper. Okay? It's bad. And they're not getting along. They are not getting along. There are different factions in the Congress. And in my campaign, we have the disappointed Democrats, we have the moderate Republicans, and we have the middle-of-the-road independents that are working together. We do not have the factions right now. Personally, I have a problem with ISIS because of the way, not for a lot of reasons, but especially because of the way they treat women. All of the radical terrorists are just horrible to women. They point blank shot a girl in the head, Malala. I'm sure everybody heard of Malala. They took the 200 Nigerian girls and they took them out of school and they kidnapped them. And now, right now, ISIS is moving across Iraq and Syria. The first thing they do is they send the girls home. They don't allow them to drive, and it's a jihad. It's terrible.
Thank you, Mr. Edmond.
Thank you. First part of that question is, does Congress get to declare as the president? Congress declares. Where we are right now is the president, to execute our current airstrikes in Syria and Iraq, decided that he had the authorization to do so based under a prior law that was passed by Congress in 2002. That law was very limited in scope to give President George W. Bush at that moment in time to execute global war on terror. I believe that that law is specific for that time, and that if any other president wanted to commit combat operations, that president had to seek authorization from Congress to do so. The recent person that's leading the charge to demand that vote, and would have liked to have had that vote before Congress recessed, was Virginia Senator Tim Kaine, and I absolutely stand by and support that vote. Secondly, are we in a state of war? Of course we are. We are now dropping tons of munitions on Syria and Iraq. We're absolutely committing combat operations across another state's borders. Congress may not have declared a state of war, but we are in de facto state of war. Question is what do we do about it? One, I think we absolutely need to call Congress right back, as both the Speaker said he would like to see, and that's been bipartisan because Nancy Pelosi said she'd like to see Congress call back as well. President Obama has refused. To make sure that we absolutely debate it, because it has second and tertiary effects. It doesn't just end with airstrikes. Thank you.
Mr. Byer.
Yes, absolutely. I think Congress needs to debate it and vote on it. I agree completely with Mr. Edmund. And I'm very proud that Tim Kaine has been leading this fight from the beginning of the summer. He changed the minds of most of the people in Congress on it. And it was very disappointing that the leadership of both houses, both parties, went away without debating it. I do think, by the way, not only is it necessary under the law, it's good for the president to have Congress come behind it and unify it rather than have him out there making those decisions by himself. I do think, however barbaric ISIS is, there's barbarism all around the world, I don't think we can just say that they're not a threat to us. We know that they're endangering the stability of Jordan, of Turkey, of Saudi Arabia, of many allies over there. They're getting awfully close to Israel, although the Israeli army is much, much it's stronger. In the Post this morning, they talked about the 720 people in one religious tribe that were killed by ISIS as a result, crucifixions, beheadings, and the like. I don't think we can just stand idly by. They say that Bill Clinton's greatest regret as president was not intervening in Rwanda, and that George W. Bush's greatest regret was not intervening in Darfur. I don't think we can let a genocide go on across the ocean and not do everything we can as Americans and as leaders to try to make a difference.
Thank you. Mr. Carson.
I'll do my best. Okay, so yes, we're obviously de facto state of war. I actually agree with these guys on that, and absolutely 100% Congress needs to debate and take a vote on this. This is ridiculous that it hasn't happened yet, and oh, by the way, maybe midterm elections have something to do with that, folks, as terrible and ridiculous as that might sound. For context, I'm a former Army captain, Iraq vet. I've been in the region, Middle East, multiple times, first working with the Israelis alongside them, setting up their missile defense systems. Next, as a ground liaison officer, briefing fighter pilots before they flew their combat missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. And finally, as a civilian with a backpack, just backpacking through the region for a few months to better understand it, the people, the history, the culture. I will tell you, as difficult as it is to say you're a subject matter expert on anything, that region's impossible and it's incredibly complicated. But up here, I am the subject matter expert on the region. There is no right answer and there is no silver bullet. I'm a libertarian. I'm a non-interventionist. That doesn't mean I'm a pacifist. That doesn't mean I'm an isolationist. You know, North Korea is an isolationist country. Nobody wants to be North Korea, folks. It means that when we're going to risk our service members' lives overseas, we must show restraint, and we only do so when we absolutely must. My threshold for that is my brother. He's serving right now, Army Infantry Ranger. The only way I'm sending him, I'm not sending him over there for this, I can tell you that. This is a regional problem. I actually get with Jerry. The Saudis can handle it. The Turks can handle it. The Jordanians can handle it. But you know, if I ever get to that point, I better be ready and willing to send my blood over to defend this country, and this is not that issue, that fight. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I have one last, this is going to be a quick question, but I'm going to give you a little bit of time to think about it. Everyone here would be a freshman representative. Who would you want to be your mentor on the Hill? We start with Ms. Beck. We're not going to pass the mic, just say out. You can speak out. Oh, I can't get him,
Okay. Thanks. Yes, actually, that's a very easy one for me. I have to give you just a tiny bit of background on that. My mother was in Florida, so I went to school in Florida, and my father was up here, so I wasn't lucky enough to go to school up here. So I met Senator Bill Nelson when I was 11 years old, and I have known him and his wife Grace ever since. He started out as a state legislature in my hometown, and my mother was a very big fan of his and a big supporter of his. And she always said to me, vote for the person, don't vote for the party. And she was a registered Republican, and of course he is a Democrat. And I'm a big fan of his. And his wife Grace said to me the other day, she says, Gwendolyn, I know your mother is gone, and we loved her very much, but since she's not here and you're running for Congress, I'm going to be your mom. Make sure you eat.
Okay.
So that's why when I'm walking around, you'll see me eating.
Okay, I didn't make myself clear. 30 seconds. Okay, Mr. Edmund.
Please go ahead.
Actually counting those seconds. Specifically, I'd say Speaker John Boehner. What was mentioned here earlier was the fact that we are at our lowest point in our annual deficit, which, to be specific, Mr. Barry said less than $500 billion. It's $483 billion. That's because of Mr. Boehner's leadership with passing the Budget Control Act. It was a very big bipartisan challenge that members of his own party didn't want to do, which is the Tea Party, but he made both members of the Republican Party vote for it and worked with Ms. Pelosi to bring those people over. President Obama signed it, and ladies and gentlemen, that act passed in 2011 is why we are at our lowest point in our annual deficit right now. That's leadership.
My role model, my mentor will be Senator Mark Warner. He's a good friend. He was a great governor. He's been a very effective senator. And he lives the ideals that I like across party lines. Mark said the other night that he'll be a gang of whatever gangs put together, gang of 6, gang of 8. Anytime Democrats and Republicans can come together to try to fix a problem, he'll be part of it. That's who I'd like to be too.
Well, I'm going to have to disagree very strongly with Micah on this one. Congressman Justin Amash out of Michigan, I think, would be the person that I would look up to very much so. This is not about Republican, Democrat. This is just about a guy that's there. He's doing all the right things, and he actually is, he's going toe-to-toe with his party leadership, with actually John Boehner. They hate the guy because he's honest and he wants to fight the good fight, and he's not here to represent the special interests. He's here to represent the ordinary American people, and that's exactly what I want to do when I come to Congress. So that's the first knock on any door is Congressman Amash. Thank you.
So my mother is actually running for Congress on the 10th, so maybe I won't need a mentor. Maybe her and I will figure it out together. She's here tonight. If I had to choose one person, though, because, again, I do want to give you an answer. I don't want to just throw out sound bites or dissemble. If I had to pick one person, it would, like Jeffrey, probably be Justin Amash. But to be clear, I'm fighting to end the drug war. I'm fighting to open borders. I'm fighting for universal health care. And I'm fighting for free higher education. This is more than 2 or 3 standard deviations away from any other congressman. So this is uncharted territory. There probably isn't anybody to mentor me on these things. I'll have to figure it out on my own. Thank you very much.
And thank you for all the candidates. You may now applaud. Okay. I'd like to thank all the candidates for appearing tonight, and I hope that they can stay around for a little bit so you can talk to them one-on-one, and good luck at the polls. I'd like to thank you, the audience. Are there evaluation forms tonight? No. Okay. You don't have to fill them out then. Okay. Remember that Election Day is November 4th, and that in-person absentee voting is available Monday through Saturday through November 1st at your local government centers. Thank you very much for being here. Drive safely, and thank you for coming tonight.